And now, the thrilling conclusion of Roses Red. It began to rain as I made myself a light supper. I treated myself to hot sweet cocoa and some more sourdough bread and garlic butter. I ate it and turned on the television for company. I did not admit to myself that darkness had brought a strange foreboding with it. I got up and checked the back door, checked the windows in all the rooms, and tested the bolt on the front door twice. I wished there was wrought iron around the windows, but it was what it was. There was an old comedy, Last of the Summer Wine, playing on TV, and I watched it as the rain fell in fat drops. I dozed off. Someone was knocking and calling my name. I opened my eyes and realized that the cottage was plunged in darkness. I sat up startled. When had the power gone? Someone knocked again. I got my bearings and felt my way to the front window and cautiously peeked out. There was a man with a flashlight standing in the rain. He must have sensed movement as I pushed the curtain aside because he turned and obligingly shone the light onto his face so I could see it was Dr. Fineworth. I hesitated, but he called again. "Hope, are you all right? Joshua's gone missing." I made my way to the front door, unbolted it and let him in. He stepped in, water draining from his Macintosh. We stood awkwardly for a few seconds before my manners kicked in. I asked him if I could borrow his flashlight to find some candles. He handed it to me without comment. I went to the kitchen and rummaged around until I found the emergency pack of 12 candles, some already half used, and a pack of matches Mrs. Elm had stored away. I hoped they still worked as we hadn't had a blackout in years. To my relief, the flame caught on the first match, and I lit 2 candles and left them on the kitchen table. "You're drenched. Come in, please," I said, and he nodded and stripped off the raincoat. I took it from him and hung it on the coat rack. He pulled off his sneakers and I invited him in to sit on the sofa, while I went to find him a clean towel. He accepted it with a grateful smile and began drying his hair. "Come into the kitchen when you're done and I'll make you some tea," I offered. I put the kettle on. Fortunately, the stove ran on gas. "What did you mean? About Joshua?" I asked. He continued to dry his hair as he answered, sounding slightly muffled under the towel. "I overheard some patients talking as I was closing the clinic this evening, and I couldn't rest until I checked on you," he began. "What?" I set out a cup and saucer for the tea. I wondered if I should offer him some toast as well, but then remembered the toaster wouldn't work with the power out. "They were talking about, well, you and the cottage." He broke off. So he had been listening to gossip about me, I thought. "Someone said that Joshua hadn't been seen for days and maybe he was plotting his revenge. I got home, but I couldn't stop thinking about it, and then the power went out." He stopped and I glanced at him. He rubbed his beard in an embarrassed gesture. "It's very kind of you, but you didn't have to come out in this downpour," I protested. I turned at the kettle's wine and picked it up. I glanced out the tiny kitchen window as a flash of light caught my attention. There was an overgrown empty lot next to the cottage, and beyond that another home. Through the tall grass I caught a glimpse of that neighbor's kitchen. Their lights were still on. I paused, the kettle in my hand. I turned and froze. Dr. Fineworth was at the kitchen doorway and staring at me. The rain was now a drizzle, but the wind had picked up. I saw his eyes go to the window behind me. He must have seen the light too. My brain ran through several acrobatic routines and ended with the conclusion that something was very wrong here. I swallowed and flexed my hand around the kettle handle. Hot water had saved me once before. "May I have that tea now, please, Hope?" he said and smiled. In the candlelight, he looked as handsome as a devil. He was also pointing a gun at me. I didn't bother with the self-recriminations. I had ignored my gut, and I was going to pay for it, and I deserved it. Naturally, I still planned to fight for my life. I stepped forward slowly and put the kettle down on the table. I pulled out a chair and sat down. He sat across from the table from me, the gun still leveled at my chest. His eyes never left my face. "Why?" I asked, past dry lips. "The Tears of Shah belonged to my mother's family. It was one of the several priceless heirlooms stolen from us during the colonial era," he said. His lips became a tight line. "And it was nicked by James Elm and an Indian nurse. So why point a gun at me?" I tried to keep my tone light. "That nurse was my mother, and James Elm was my father," he said quietly. I gaped. But yes, his resemblance to his mother was definite. I couldn't believe I hadn't seen it before. He didn't look at all like the photos of Elm, however. Still, I believed him. My mother dishonored her family by falling in love with a British soldier and helping him to steal their treasure. The betrayal cost her everything. I saw his knuckles tighten around the gun grip. "Everything," he repeated, and I heard deep pain in his voice. "What happened?" I said. It wasn't a stretch to sound sympathetic. "He took the jewels and abandoned her, pregnant with me. Her family wanted nothing to do with her, so they disowned her." He looked off at some point beyond my head. I had always thought that was the end of the story, but just before she died, she showed me a telegram she received in 1915. It was so faded and yellowed, I couldn't even make out the word on it, he said. It was an unbelievable conversation. He doesn't want to kill me, or at least not yet. My confused brain searched for some way to talk him out of this. "What?" I cleared my throat. "What was written on it?" I put my hands on the table and clasped them together a few inches from the kettle, steam still wafting from the spout. Even if I threw it at him, could I get to the front door? Had I bolted it after he came in? I must have. There was just one word on it. Ayana, my mother's name. I'll spare you the suspense. James sent it to her about 2 weeks before he was killed in battle. His lips twisted into a bitter smile. Just her name? I let my fingers flex slightly. I tried to work out how to swing the kettle in a way that would knock the gun out of his hand, possibly scalding him in the process. On the other hand, he might jerk his hand and shoot. But what choice did I have? His next words stopped me short. Her name. It means beautiful flower. I didn't realize it until I came to Cumberbatch what it meant. He paused. I looked at him blankly. He leaned forward in his eagerness. The minute I tracked down Mrs. Elm, and I saw this house, I knew he had sent my mother a message. He hadn't abandoned her. His eyes were wide with a kind of perverse excitement. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Don't you see? The rose garden. He was trying to tell my mother that the Tears of Shah were buried." He leaned back and I saw the triumph on his face. To me, it sounded far-fetched. I couldn't help voicing my doubt. He planted the garden because his wife loved roses. He made a derisive sound. He loved her so much he carried on an affair with my mother less than a month after he married? I was struck again by the impression of wounded pride as he continued. A week before June Elm died, I finally told her the truth. I showed her the photograph of him my mother has kept all those years. I told her everything. You know what she said? My James wouldn't lower himself to a coolie. Those were her last words to me. "So you killed her?" I accused. I grabbed the kettle handle, but at that moment we were both distracted when the front door suddenly opened. Dr. Fineworth was less startled than I, and he swiftly grabbed the kettle from me. We were both on our feet now, but my eyes were riveted to the image of Giselle dressed in dark jeans and a turtleneck sweater, and holding a shovel walking through my front door. "Took your time," Dr. Fineworth remarked. Giselle's bright blonde hair was hidden under a black beret. She sneered at me. To my utter disgust, she walked up to him and kissed him full on the lips. "Josh was dithering out in the car. He doesn't have the stomach for it," Giselle said. Her voice rang with contempt. her face heavily made up. Dressed to kill. You killed her. I directed my comment to the new arrival. The old cow was gonna pop off anyway, Giselle remarked with a smirk. I felt sick. I wish you'd let me buy the cottage off you, Hope. We just needed access to the garden, but then you started poking around about the pills. He sounded regretful. Most confusing, man. What about your fiancé? I asked Giselle. Girl's gotta make sacrifices for her future, she said and shrugged. She hefted the shovel in her hands and stared at me. Nice threesome you got going on. You murdered that defenseless old woman just so you could dig up her garden. You're disgusting. I glared at her. Her face tightened and she made a move towards me, but Dr. Fineworth checked her. The intimacy between them was unmistakable. A thought struck me. Joshua doesn't know you two are lovers, does he? He thinks it's the three of you together looking for the jewels. I bet the two of you were a couple long before you came to Cumberbatch. I threw out these rather wild accusations, stalling for time. The kettle was of no use against the two of them. I could feel my body shaking and sweat running down my face. They were going to kill me. Lord alone knew what they were waiting for. A minute later, the answer presented itself. The front door opened again, and another person came in. The candlelight was dimming, but I recognized Joshua. Well, Hope girl, this is it. I had escaped death once, but it had caught up to me. I thought of my baby girl with a wrench. How I wished I had done things differently. So many wasted years of resentment and bitterness on my part. I prayed she knew I loved her. Giselle handed the shovel to Joshua. He took it and stood looking awkward. It's your inheritance she stole. Do it, she ordered. I stared him down. He flinched and then began to raise the shovel like a bat. Your fingerprints all over it. I bet that's the same shovel you've been using in the garden. You really stupid, boy? I snapped. My heart was hammering, but I brazened it out. Joshua gaped and glanced at Giselle. She took what's yours. She killed your Aunt June, Giselle shouted. They're lovers and they're going to kill you when they find those jewels, I insisted. Look at them, Joshua. They're just using you, I urged. Joshua's eyes snapped to and fro like a demented owl. He still held the shovel poised to strike me. Do it now, you pathetic loser, Giselle finally snapped. Joshua turned abruptly and finished his swing, right into Dr. Fineworth's shoulder. Joshua! Dr. Fineworth roared as he dropped the gun and grabbed his own injured arm. Miss Hope, are you there? A quavering voice came through the half-open front door. To this day, I have no idea where I found the strength or the courage, but so help me, I tackled Giselle. I dived at her midsection like one of those American footballers, and my superior weight rocked her off her feet for a few seconds. She made strange bleating noises as she tried to break my hold off her waist. I wrestled her to the ground and pinned her on her back. There was confusion around me. I heard more voices, and then running, and the sound of things being knocked over in the living room. Joshua, it must have been, hit me with his bony elbow in the back of my head, and I released Giselle. I groaned, and she shoved me off and scrambled to her feet. The candlelight illuminated the figures of people in the living room. My head ached. I crawled with difficulty under the kitchen table and tried to peek at what was happening. Hope! Hope, where are you? A familiar voice called. I cried real tears then. In the kitchen! I called back. I sat up, and a few seconds later, the bright beam of a flashlight blinded me. You're here? I asked Dunstan. He grabbed me under the tricep and helped me to my feet. He hugged me. You okay, old girl? He asked. They hurt you? No, I'm okay. My head... I'm fine, really. I pulled out of his embrace. There were quite a few people in the living room. Suddenly, the lights came back on. What's happening? I asked. When you told me about the pills, I realized you could be in for trouble, so we came back early. I went to the police station and convinced them to send an officer to come check on you, he said. From the grim set of his mouth, I guessed he must have been quite adamant with the police. God bless him. He told me Marjorie was still at the station. Was that you calling out before? It didn't sound like you, I said, and glanced around the room. Mr. Smith from next door was standing off in a corner and gave me an embarrassed glance. He came toward us, bypassing an officer who was cuffing Joshua. I saw your lights were out, but there seemed to be people entering your house. I thought I should check. He cleared his throat. I went up to him and hugged him. It was probably the first time in his life he'd been hugged by a black woman, and I felt he was well deserving of it. The officer in the room, who had come on Dunstan's insistence, had Giselle and Joshua in hand, but Dr. Fineworth was nowhere in sight. He slipped away in the dark in the confusion, Dunstan said. They'll get him. He's on foot. I was not reassured. The next 2 hours were surreal. As the officers left with the Bonnie and Clyde in tow, Dunstan went along to retrieve Marjorie, and Mr. Smith and I sat in the living room together to wait for their return. He actually made us some much-needed cups of tea. We sat on the sofa, and I tried not to let my emotions get the best of me. Mr. Smith kept his eye studiously on his cup as I wiped away tears. We were silent for a few companionable moments. The tears of Shah are not in the garden, he said quietly. He sipped his tea. I stared at him. Eventually, he met my gaze calmly. I blinked. What? I said at last. We found him about 30 years ago. Yes, I'd say about that time. We had a parasite aphid attacking roses that year. His watery grey eyes held mine and then slid off. You found them? I literally could not process what I was hearing. Oh yes, Mrs. Elm asked me to dig up the infected plants. She was desperate to save Jane's beloved roses, so we started in the backyard, and under the first plant I found a box. One of those ornate carved ones from the Orient, I think. He wrinkled his forehead in the effort of memory. There was a word written on it, a foreign word, maybe Arabic, I think. Mrs. Elm didn't know what it meant either, so we unwrapped it, and inside was this pair of fancy earrings. Quite ugly, actually, but you could see they must be worth something. Big blue stones and some diamonds. He sipped his tea. Where are they? I asked. I felt perhaps I was in a dream. Was this conversation taking place, or had Joshua's bony elbow jolted some screws loose in my head? He reached into his jacket pocket and took out a small wooden jewelry box wrapped in tissue. He handed it to me, and I took it automatically. I stared at it as I held it in both hands. Well, there was this old newspaper clipping in the box with him, and it was a short story about a robbery, and the tears of Shah and whatnot. She got very upset and said her James would never have anything to do with it, so take him away. He leaned back and sipped again. If I had the strength, I would have slapped the cup out of his hand. And? I said from between clenched teeth. Well, that's it really. I didn't think it'd do no good claiming we'd just found him. I was in the army back then, you see. They might have just got it in their heads I stole him. She couldn't bear the sight of him, so I had him in a deposit box in my bank all these years. I heard him, but I could only focus on the box in my hands. Someone had crudely carved the word Ayana on it. It was all true. Incredible. Why are you giving it to me? I asked, dragging my eyes to his face. I only thought of it again when I saw Joshua digging in the garden the other night. In any case, it was found on your property, so it's yours to deal with, he said, and nodded to the box in my hand like he had fulfilled some kind of duty. I took a deep breath and carefully took the cover of the box off. Inside were a pair of drop-style earrings with a matching pair of large stones of a depth so blue they seemed almost purple. They were set in gold and surrounded by a myriad of small round diamonds. The stones sparkled and caught the light with a brilliance I'd never seen. I couldn't believe they were real. If he had not threatened my life, I would have spared a moment's pity for Dr. Fineworth. I'm going to return them to India, I said, when I could breathe again. He looked at me perplexed. Why? They've been here all this time. They're British now. He seemed to think the matter settled. I watched him for a while. "You'll be keeping the cottage then?" he asked. I noted the deliberate casual tone. I gave a tight smile. "I'll be selling to the first person who comes along," I declared. He looked mildly surprised, then shrugged. I replaced the lid on the box. We waited for Dunstan and Marjorie to return, and drank the rest of our tea without further comment. The end.